They thought exiling her to the frozen mountains would kill her. They thought she was a broken Omega without a wolf. But they were catastrophically
Why have
wrong.
you forsaken
The
me?
Alpha King triplets
Please
weren't
give me
searching for a
strength.
submissive mate. They were hunting their fated moonborn queen. The candle had burned down to a stub when Evangeline Ravenscar heard the howling, not the wind that screamed through the Scottish Highlands every winter night, tearing at the ancient stone walls of the convent of Crimson Thorn. Not the normal sounds that had filled her 24 years within these sacred walls. This was something else, something that made every nerve in her body stand at attention, every instinct she had learned to suppress suddenly roaring to life. Three voices, low and haunting, calling from the forest edge. She pressed her forehead against the frost-covered window of her small cell, her breath fogging the glass. Beyond the courtyard, beyond the iron gates blessed by priests 2 centuries ago, the forest waited. Dark pines heavy with snow, shadows that moved when they shouldn't. And somewhere in that darkness, the howling continued, the same howling from her dreams. Evangeline closed her eyes, and there they were. 3 massive wolves standing at the tree line, golden eyes fixed on her with an intensity that burned even in sleep. She had been dreaming of them since she could remember. As a child, she thought they were guardian angels in animal form. As she grew older, the sisters told her they were demons sent to tempt her away from God's path. But in her heart, in the deepest part of herself that she never spoke aloud, Evangeline knew they were neither angels nor demons. They were hers, and she was theirs. A sharp knock shattered her reverie. "Child, Mother Superior." Celestine's voice carried through the heavy wooden door. "Step away from the window." Evangeline obeyed immediately, years of convent discipline overriding every other instinct. She turned to face the door as it opened, revealing the elderly woman who had raised her. Celestine was 70 if she was a day, her face lined with decades of prayer and devotion, but her eyes were sharp as winter ice. "You felt them again." It wasn't a question. "I heard howling, Mother Superior, nothing more." "Don't lie to me, Evangeline, not after 22 years. Celestine stepped into the small room, closing the door behind her. In her weathered hands, she carried something wrapped in oiled cloth. "Your scent is stronger tonight. The full moon brings it out, makes you visible to things that hunt in darkness." Fear prickled down Evangeline's spine. "What things?" "Sit." Evangeline sat on the narrow cot that served as her bed. Celestine joined her, the old wood creaking beneath their combined weight. The older woman's hands trembled slightly as she unwrapped the cloth, revealing a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. "I have kept this from you long enough," Celestine said quietly. "Perhaps too long, but I made a promise to your mother, and I have honored it until now. Tonight, that promise must be broken." "My mother?" Evangeline's heart hammered against her ribs. In 24 years, no one had ever spoken of her parents. She had been told only that she was found on the convent steps as an infant, abandoned and alone. "Lyora Ravenscar, she was 26 when she died. You were 2 years old." The name hit Evangeline like a physical blow. Leora. She turned the name over in her mind, tasting it, testing its weight. Her mother had a name, had lived, had existed beyond the anonymous shadow that had haunted Evangeline's entire life. "She brought you here herself," Celestine continued, her voice thick with memory. "In the dead of night, wrapped in a cloth embroidered with moon symbols. She was dying. I could smell death on her the moment she crossed the threshold. But she was determined. She placed you in my arms and said 3 words, 'Hide her, please.'" Evangeline's hands shook as she reached for the journal. "Why?" "Because of what you are, what your blood carries. Your mother was Sanguis Lunae, the last of an ancient bloodline, born once every 300 years. And you, child, are the next." The word should have meant nothing, should have sounded like madness, like the ravings of an old woman who had spent too long locked away from the world. But something in Evangeline recognized them, recognized the truth in them the way a key recognizes the lock it was made to open. "The dreams," she whispered, "the wolves, they've been searching for me. For 24 years, yes. Your mother's mate, an alpha named Aldrich Nightbane, was killed by those who feared the power of the Sanguis Lunae bloodline. Your mother survived him by 2 years, just long enough to see you safely hidden. The bond between mates is sacred. When one dies, the other follows." Celestine pressed the journal into Evangeline's hands. "She wrote this for you." Everything she knew about what you are, what you will become, and what dangers wait in the darkness. Read it, learn it, and for the love of all that is holy, never leave the consecrated ground after sunset. The wards I have maintained for 24 years are weakening. I am old, child. When I die, the protections die with me, and they will come for you. The howling rose again, closer now. Three distinct voices, each one pulling at something deep inside Evangeline's chest. A connection she had felt all her life, but never understood. What do they want from me? Celestine's expression was grave. Everything. The next evening came too quickly. Evangeline spent the day in a fog, moving through her usual duties with mechanical precision while her mind raced through the pages of her mother's journal. Leora's handwriting was elegant but urgent, the words of a woman who knew time was running out. The Sanguas Lunae bloodline carried power in the blood itself. Wolves could smell it from miles away. To an alpha, it was intoxicating. To a pack, it was salvation. A complete bond with Sanguis Lunae could amplify a wolf's strength tenfold, grant immunity to silver, allow daywalking without exhaustion. But the bond required consent, required choice. Enforced claiming resulted in madness and death for both parties. Evangeline had just reached the final entry, her mother's last written words, when the bells began to ring. 3 tolls. The signal for assembly. Her blood turned to ice. She knew what this meant. Once a year on the night of the hunter's moon, Alpha Draven Thornwolf came to the convent of Crimson Thorn to select Omegas for his pack. It was considered an honor. The chosen ones were given protection, purpose, a place in society beyond the stone walls that had confined them since birth. Evangeline had never been chosen, never even been considered, because everyone knew she was broken. 24 years old and she had never shifted, never felt the call of the moon, never experienced the sacred transformation that defined their kind. In a world of wolves, she was human, worthless, a genetic dead end. The other Omegas whispered that she must have done something terrible in a past life to be cursed this way. Evangeline closed the journal and tucked it beneath her thin mattress. Her hands were steady as she smoothed down her simple gray dress, tucked her dark hair behind her ears. Whatever happened tonight, she would face it with dignity. She had survived 24 years of pitying looks and whispered insults. She could survive one more night. The great hall of the convent blazed with candlelight when Evangeline slipped through the side door, hoping to remain unnoticed in the shadows. 150 wolves filled the space. Pack members from Silverclaw, visiting dignitaries from neighboring territories, and every Omega from the convent, all dressed in their finest clothes, all hoping to catch the Alpha's eye. At the center of it all stood Draven Thornwolf. He was a massive man, even for an Alpha. 6.5 feet of solid muscle with silver threaded through his dark hair and scars marking his face like a roadmap of violence survived. His eyes were pale amber, cold as winter frost, and when they swept the room, every Omega present dropped their gaze in automatic submission. Evangeline pressed herself against the stone wall, making herself as small as possible. "You should not be here." The whisper came from her left. Sister Margot, one of the younger nuns, her face tight with concern. "Mother Superior said all Omegas must attend," Evangeline whispered back. "She didn't mean you. Go. Now, before he—" "Well, well." The voice cut through the room like a blade. Draven's voice rough with authority and something darker. "What have we here?" Every head turned, every eye found Evangeline. Her stomach dropped as Draven began walking toward her, the crowd parting before him like water before a ship's bow. His nostrils flared as he approached, scenting the air, and something flickered in those cold amber eyes. Recognition. Hunger. And beneath it all, fear. "Evangeline Ravenscar," he said, her name heavy with mockery. 24 years old. Still wolfless. Still broken. "Tell me, girl, why are you wasting space in my presence?" The humiliation burned through her like acid. 150 wolves watching. 150 witnesses to her shame. She forced herself to meet his eyes, just for a moment. "I was told to attend, Alpha. I meant no disrespect." His hand moved faster than she could track, gripping her chin, forcing her head back. His fingers were like iron, bruising even through the simple touch. He leaned in close, inhaling deeply at her neck, and Evangeline's entire body went rigid. She could feel it. The way his wolf recoiled even as the man held her in place. The way recognition warred with revulsion in his expression. He knew what she was, and he was afraid of it. "You smell wrong," Draven announced loudly, releasing her so suddenly she stumbled. "Like decay, like wrongness. You are not broken, girl. You are cursed." Gasps rippled through the crowd. A tall, blonde woman stepped forward, her beauty as cold and perfect as carved ice. Isolde Nightshade, Draven's daughter and beta of Silverclaw Pack. She looked at Evangeline the way one might look at a diseased animal. Father, surely you don't mean to claim this creature for our pack. Claim her? Draven laughed, the sound ugly and cruel. I wouldn't let her clean the pack kennels. No, I have another purpose for Evangeline Ravenscar. He turned to address the full assembly, his voice ringing off the stone walls. 24 years this Omega has lived under the protection of holy ground, consuming resources, taking space meant for fertile females who might actually contribute to the future of our kind. 24 years of failure, of genetic weakness, of a bloodline so corrupted it produces nothing but empty vessels. Each word landed like a physical blow. I hereby invoke the old law, Draven continued. Trial by survival. Evangeline Ravenscar will be exiled to Frost Peak Pass. She will be given nothing but the clothes on her back. If she survives 7 days in the wild, she may petition for asylum in any pack that will have her. If she dies, he smiled, then nature has done what we all knew needed to be done. The room exploded into whispers. Trial by survival hadn't been invoked in decades. It was a death sentence dressed as justice. No Omega, especially not a wolfless one, could survive 7 days in the frozen mountains. Evangeline felt the world tilting beneath her feet. Please. The word escaped before she could stop it. Mother Superior Celestine is not here, Draven interrupted. I made certain of that. The old woman has protected you long enough. It ends tonight. 2 massive guards grabbed Evangeline's arms. She didn't struggle. What would be the point? She was one small Omega against a room full of wolves who had already decided her fate. As they dragged her toward the doors, she caught sight of Sister Margot near the back of the crowd. The young nun's face was wet with tears, but her hands moved quickly, slipping something small into the folds of her habit. A flint stone, a bundle of dried herbs, a fighting chance. The night air hit Evangeline like a slap. February in the Scottish Highlands was unforgiving at the best of times. Tonight, with the wind howling down from the peaks and snow beginning to fall, it was deadly. The guards stripped her of the heavy wool cloak she'd been wearing, leaving her in just the thin linen dress. Her shoes they allowed her to keep, at least. Small mercies. Draven approached one final time, standing so close she could feel the heat radiating from his massive frame. I know what you are, he whispered, too low for anyone else to hear. I can smell it beneath the wards, beneath the holy water they've been washing you in. Sanguis Lunae. Your mother was Lyora, my brother's mate, the abomination that destroyed him. Evangeline's breath caught. That's right, girl. Aldrich was my brother, and your mother's bond killed him just as surely as the council's blades. So you'll forgive me if I take particular pleasure in watching you freeze to death in the same mountains where his body was left to rot. He leaned in closer, his breath hot against her ear. Run fast, little Omega, because if the cold doesn't kill you, they will. Who? But Draven was already walking away, back into the warmth and light of the convent, leaving her alone in the darkness with nothing but the thin dress, worn shoes, and the small bundle of survival tools hidden against her chest. The gates clanged shut behind her. 150 wolves had watched her public humiliation, 150 witnesses to her exile. Not one had spoken in her defense. Evangeline stood there for a long moment, letting the reality of her situation sink in. 7 days. 7 days to survive the unsurvivable. 7 days before she could even begin to think about what came after, if there was an after. The wind picked up, driving snow into her face with stinging force. She could already feel the cold seeping through the thin linen, settling into her bones. Hypothermia would set in within hours if she didn't find shelter, so she started walking. Not toward the road that wound down into the valley, not toward any human settlement where she might find help. Those were obvious choices, and Draven would expect them. His scouts would be watching, ready to report if she tried to cheat the trial. No. Evangeline turned toward Frost Peak Pass itself, toward the mountains that had terrified travelers for centuries, toward the wilderness that even experienced hunters avoided in winter, toward the only place where she might actually have a chance. Behind her, in the forest shadows beyond the convent walls, 3 pairs of golden eyes watched her go. The first night was the worst. Evangeline walked until her legs gave out, stumbled until her lungs burned, crawled when she could no longer stand. The snow fell heavier with each passing hour, erasing her footprints, erasing any sign that she had ever existed. Twice she fell through ice-covered streams and had to drag herself out with fingers so numb she couldn't feel them. 3 times she heard howling in the distance and had to force herself to keep moving, to not curl up in the snow and surrender to the exhaustion pulling at her like a riptide. The bundle Sister Margot had given her saved her life. When Evangeline finally found a small overhang of rock that provided minimal shelter from the wind, She used the flint to strike sparks into the dried moss and herbs. It took 20 tries with fingers that barely functioned, but eventually a small flame caught. She fed it carefully. Twigs first, then larger branches scavenged from beneath the snow. The fire was pathetic compared to the vast cold surrounding her, but it was life. It was hope. Evangeline huddled as close as she dared, slowly rotating to warm all sides of her body. Her dress was soaked through, freezing against her skin. She peeled it off with shaking hands and hung it near the fire to dry, wrapping herself in pine boughs for insulation the way the convent's herbalist had once shown her. The sisters had taught her many things over the years. How to identify edible plants, how to set snares for small game, how to read the weather in the clouds. Skills they claimed were for spiritual enlightenment, for understanding God's creation. Evangeline suspected now that Mother Superior Celestine had been preparing her for exactly this. As the night deepened and the stars wheeled overhead, she thought about her mother's journal, about Leora's final warning, written in a hand that shook with approaching death. The bond is paradise and prison. Guard your heart. Not all who claim you deserve you. Had her mother known this would happen? Had she foreseen the exile, the trial, the slow death by exposure? Or had she simply known that being Sanguis Lunae meant a life of running, hiding, surviving against impossible odds? Evangeline fed another branch to the fire and closed her eyes. In her mind, the three wolves waited at the forest edge, golden eyes glowing in the darkness. Find us, they seemed to whisper. We're waiting. But how could she find them when she could barely survive the night? Day 2 brought unexpected mercy in the form of rabbit tracks. Evangeline followed them to a warren near a frozen stream and managed to set 2 crude snares using plant fibers and bent saplings. It took most of the morning, but when she returned at dusk, 1 snare had triggered. The rabbit was small, barely enough meat to matter, but it was food. She cleaned it the way she'd seen the convent's cook do countless times, using a sharp stone to skin and gut it. The work was messy and harder than it looked, but eventually she had edible meat to roast over her fire. It tasted like salvation. That night, wrapped in her now dry dress in a makeshift shelter of pine boughs, Evangeline allowed herself to believe she might actually survive this. Day 3 shattered that illusion. She woke to the sound of howling. Not the distant calls she'd heard before. This was close. So close she could hear the underbrush rustling as something large moved through it. Evangeline scrambled to her feet, her heart pounding. The fire had burned down to coals in the night, providing almost no light. She grabbed the largest branch she could find and held it like a club, knowing it would be useless against a full-grown wolf. The howling stopped. Silence pressed in from all sides, somehow more terrifying than the noise had been. Then she smelled it. Blood, fresh and copper bright, mixed with scents of pine and midnight, and something wild that made her pulse quicken for reasons she didn't understand. Against every survival instinct screaming at her to run, Evangeline followed the scent. She found them in a clearing half a mile from her makeshift camp. 3 wolves, massive beyond anything natural. The smallest of them was easily the size of a full-grown bear, all muscle and fur and lethal grace. They lay in the snow, bleeding from dozens of wounds, silver arrows protruding from their flanks. The black wolf's left eye was matted with blood. The silver one had a gash across its ribs so deep she could see bone. The charcoal wolf's breathing was labored, each exhale sending pink-tinged foam from its muzzle. They were dying, and they were the most beautiful things Evangeline had ever seen. She should have run, should have left them to their fate and counted herself lucky to have avoided becoming their prey. But as she stood there, frozen in indecision, the black wolf's eyes opened, golden, burning, aware, and fixed on her with an intensity that stole her breath. You, something whispered in her mind. Not words exactly, but meaning, recognition, relief. Finally, Evangeline dropped to her knees in the snow without consciously deciding to move. Her hands reached for the black wolf before rational thought could intervene, pressing against the matted fur of its massive head. The moment her skin made contact, the world exploded. Light, heat, a shock that traveled from her fingertips through her entire body, igniting every nerve ending, setting her blood on fire. She gasped and tried to pull away, but the sensation held her frozen, locked in contact with the wolf whose eyes had gone wide with the same shock. The blood song. That's what her mother's journal had called it. The first recognition between Sanguis Lunae and her fated mate. A connection that transcended species, transcended reason, transcended everything except the simple, overwhelming truth. Mine. The word echoed through her consciousness in 3 distinct voices. The black wolf, the silver wolf, the charcoal wolf, all three of them claiming her simultaneously. Evangeline's vision blurred. This wasn't possible. Her mother's writings had described the bond as singular, sacred, one mate for one sanguis lunae. Not three, never three. But the blood song didn't lie. She could feel them now, even without touching. Three distinct presences in her awareness. Three flames burning at different intensities, but all connected to her by threads of light that she could almost see. The black wolf shuddered beneath her hands. Its form began to shift, bones cracking and reforming, fur receding to reveal human skin. Evangeline scrambled backward as the transformation completed, leaving a man lying in the snow where the wolf had been. He was massive even in human form, easily 6.5 feet of scarred muscle and ancient power. Black hair fell past his jaw, and when he opened his eyes, they still held that burning gold intensity. "You're real," he rasped, his voice rough with pain and disbelief. "We thought 300 years we've searched. We thought the bloodline was extinct." The other two wolves shifted as well, the transformations sickeningly beautiful in their violence. Three naked men now lay bleeding in the snow, and Evangeline's face burned as she turned away, giving them what privacy she could. "Don't," the black-haired one said. "Don't turn away. Please. We've waited so long just to see you." "Who are you?" Her voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "Calum Stormfang." The black-haired one, clearly the eldest, despite the timelessness that marked all their features. "These are my brothers." Zephyr. The silver-haired one with ice-blue eyes nodded. "And Orion." The charcoal-haired one with amber eyes struggled to sit up, his hand pressed against the wound in his ribs. "You're dying," Evangeline said, forcing herself to focus on the immediate crisis rather than the impossible revelation of the bond. "Those are silver arrows. The wounds won't heal on their own." "We know." Calum's attempt at a smile was pained. "We were ambushed. Rival pack. They knew we'd be distracted. We could feel you nearby, could feel the pull getting stronger. We weren't as careful as we should have been. I need to remove the arrows and pack the wounds with herbs to draw out the silver poisoning." The words came automatically, years of convent medical training overriding her shock. "It's going to hurt." "We're alphas," Orion managed, his voice a low rumble despite his obvious pain. "We can handle pain." What they couldn't handle, Evangeline discovered over the next hour, was her touch. Every time her hands made contact with their skin, the blood song flared. Every time she pressed healing herbs into their wounds, bound them with strips torn from her already tattered dress, the connection between them intensified until all four of them were breathing hard, sweating despite the cold. By the time she finished, Evangeline was shaking from more than just exhaustion and exposure. "You need shelter," she said, not meeting any of their eyes. "My camp is crude, but it has a fire. Can you walk?" Calum stood first, and Evangeline's breath caught despite herself. Even wounded, even naked, he radiated authority and power. Zephyr and Orion rose as well, moving with the careful precision of predators who knew exactly how damaged they were. "Lead the way, little mate," Calum said softly. The endearment should have bothered her, should have triggered all the warnings her mother had written about wolves who claimed what they wanted without asking. But it didn't feel like claiming. It felt like coming home. They shifted back to wolf form for the walk to her camp, the transformation easier on their healing bodies than trying to navigate the forest on two legs. Evangeline led the way, hyper-aware of three massive presences following her through the darkness. The blood song hummed between them, a constant awareness that made her skin tingle and her heart race. When they reached her pathetic shelter, she rebuilt the fire while they arranged themselves around it, still in wolf form. The flames cast dancing shadows across their fur, picking out silver and black and charcoal in mesmerizing patterns. "I don't understand," Evangeline said finally, her voice barely audible over the crackling fire. "My mother's journal said the bond was singular, one mate, but I feel all three of you. How is that possible?" Calum shifted back to human form, and this time Evangeline didn't look away. His body was a map of scars, centuries of violence survived, but his eyes were gentle as they met hers. "We're cursed," he said simply. "Triplet alphas, born in the same moment from the same womb. The moon marked us as something other, something that shouldn't exist. The curse dictates that we share one fated mate. If we don't find her and complete the bond before our 350th year, all three of us die." "How old are you now?" 340. Zephyr spoke for the first time, his voice cooler than his brother's, analytical. He remained in wolf form, but his ice-blue eyes were fixed on her with unnerving intensity. "We have 10 years left. We've spent 300 of them searching. For me, the idea was incomprehensible. But I'm wolfless. I'm broken. I can't possibly be what you need. Orion shifted then, his amber eyes blazing. You're not wolfless. His voice was rough, fierce. The wolf is in you. We can smell it, feel it through the maw. It's sealed, locked away behind wards so old and powerful it would take a team of witches to place them. Why would anyone do that? To hide you, Caleb said. To keep you safe until the right time. Until you found us, or we found you. Sanguis Lunae females are hunted, Evangeline. Coveted, killed for the power in their blood. Someone who loved you very much went to extreme lengths to make sure you survived long enough to make your own choice. Her mother, it had to have been her mother. The dreams, Evangeline whispered. I've been dreaming about you since I was a child. 3 wolves watching me from the forest. We've been watching, Caleb confirmed. Waiting. The convent wards prevented us from getting close. But we could feel you, could sense you growing stronger year by year. Tonight, when you crossed the boundary, when you left consecrated ground, we felt it like a beacon igniting. That's why Draven exiled me. Understanding crashed over her. He knew what I was, and he wanted me dead before you could find me. Draven Thornwolf is a coward who fears what he can't control, Orion growled, fury heating his words. He knew a bonded Sanguis Lunae would shift the balance of power in the territories. He wanted to eliminate the threat. Evangeline looked at the 3 of them, these ancient, powerful beings who claimed to have been searching centuries for her. It should have terrified her, should have sent her running back into the frozen wilderness. But the blood song sang between them, true and constant, and she couldn't deny what she felt. What happens now, she asked. Caleb's expression softened. Now we offer you a choice. Come with us to Iron Peak Citadel, our territory, our home. You'll be safe there, protected, given time to learn about what you are, what you could become. We won't force the bond, won't claim you without your consent, but we can give you shelter while you decide. And if I refuse? Then we protect you anyway, Zephyr said quietly. The bond exists whether completed or not. You're ours to guard, even if you never choose to be ours to keep. 7 days, Draven had said. 7 days to survive the trial. Evangeline had made it 3 on her own. 3 days of cold and hunger and constant fear. She looked at her makeshift shelter, at the small fire that was already dying, at the vast wilderness stretching in every direction, full of dangers she couldn't even name. Then she looked at the 3 wolves watching her with golden eyes that held centuries of patience and desperate hope. It wasn't really a choice at all. I'll come with you, she said, but I need you to understand something. I'm not who you think I am. I'm not some powerful Omega Queen. I'm just Evangeline. I've never shifted, never felt my wolf, never been anything special. If you're waiting for me to become something I'm not, we're waiting for you to become exactly who you are, Caleb interrupted gently. Nothing more, nothing less. Orion stood and patted over to her on silent pause. Up close, he was enormous, his head level with hers even though she was sitting upright. He pressed his massive forehead against hers, and the blood song swelled between them. Home, his presence whispered into her mind. You're coming home. Evangeline's eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. She had spent 24 years believing she had no home, no place in the world, no purpose beyond surviving each day. But as she sat there with 3 ancient alphas surrounding her, their warmth pushing back the killing cold, the blood song humming between them like a promise, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she had been wrong. Maybe she wasn't broken. Maybe she had just been waiting for them. They left at first light. Evangeline's legs were unsteady after 3 days of limited food and constant exposure. So Orion shifted to wolf form and knelt, allowing her to climb onto his back. His fur was thick and warm, and she buried her fingers in it, holding on as he rose to his full height. Caleb and Zephyr flanked them, moving through the forest with the fluid grace of apex predators. They set a steady pace, faster than Evangeline could have managed on foot, but not so fast that she felt unsafe. As the sun rose higher, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of gold and rose, Evangeline looked back one final time at the convent that had been her entire world. Somewhere in those ancient stone walls, Mother Superior Celestine was probably praying for her soul. Evangeline sent a silent prayer back. Thank you for keeping me safe, for preparing me, for loving me enough to let me go. Then she turned her face forward toward whatever future waited in Iron Peak Citadel, toward the 3 alphas who claimed she was their destiny, toward the sealed wolf inside her that might finally have a chance to wake. The blood song hummed between them, growing stronger with every mile they traveled. And in the distance, just barely visible through the morning mist, Evangeline thought she could see the towers of a great fortress rising against the sky. Home. She was going home. Iron Peak Citadel rose from the mountains like something out of a dream. Towers of black stone stretched toward the sky, their peaks crowned with silver that caught the morning light and blazed like captured stars. Massive walls surrounded the fortress, carved with runes that seemed to pulse with faint violet light as Evangeline approached. And beyond those walls, she could see the sprawl of a thriving territory. Buildings and courtyards and training grounds where wolves moved with purposeful grace. This was power. This was home to the most feared alphas in the Northern Territories, and they were bringing her here, treating her like she belonged. The gates opened as they approached, massive iron doors swinging wide without anyone touching them. Evangeline felt the magic in those gates, ancient and protective, recognizing the three brothers who ruled this place. Orion carried her through into a courtyard where dozens of wolves had gathered, word of their return apparently having spread fast. They all dropped to one knee as the Stormfang brothers passed, heads bowed in submission. But their eyes found Evangeline, curious, wondering, some hostile. Who was this bedraggled Omega riding on their youngest alpha's back? Ignore them, Calum said quietly, having shifted to human form and pulled on clothes that someone had waiting. You're exhausted. Food and rest first, politics later. He led them through corridors of polished stone, past tapestries depicting battles and ceremonies from centuries past. Servants scurried out of their way, their expressions carefully neutral. Finally, they stopped before an ornate wooden door. These are your chambers, Calum said, pushing it open. Everything you need is inside. We're down the hall if you need us. Evangeline slid off Orion's back, her legs trembling as they took her weight. She looked through the doorway and her breath caught. The room was enormous. A four-poster bed draped in midnight blue silk dominated one wall, a copper bathtub already steamed with hot water near a roaring fireplace. And through an archway, she could see a wardrobe standing open, filled with gowns in every color imaginable. This is too much, she whispered. This is the least we can offer, Zephyrin replied, having also shifted and dressed. His ice-blue eyes studied her with that analytical intensity she was beginning to recognize. You're our mate, Evangeline. Even if you choose not to complete the bond, you deserve to be treated with the respect that position commands. I'm covered in dirt and blood. I smell like 3 days of survival in the wilderness. I don't deserve— You survived what should have killed you, Orion interrupted, his voice rough with emotion even in human form. You saved our lives when you could have left us to die. You are the bravest person I have ever met, and if anyone in this citadel suggests otherwise, they answer to me. The fierce protectiveness in his tone made something warm bloom in Evangeline's chest. Rest, Calum said gently. We'll send food. Sleep as long as you need. Tomorrow is soon enough to begin learning about what you are. They left her alone, and Evangeline stood in the center of that luxurious room feeling completely out of place. 24 hours ago, she had been sleeping in a shelter made of pine boughs. Now she was in chambers fit for royalty. The bath called to her with irresistible force. She stripped off her ruined dress and sank into the hot water with a groan of pure relief. Days of dirt and fear and exhaustion floated away. Someone had left soap that smelled of lavender and honey, and she scrubbed herself until her skin was pink and clean. When she finally emerged, wrapped in a robe of soft wool, she found food waiting. Bread and cheese and roasted meat, fresh fruit that must have cost a fortune this time of year. She ate until her stomach protested, then crawled into the massive bed. The silk sheets felt like heaven against her clean skin. Evangeline closed her eyes, meaning to rest for just a moment. She slept for 16 hours straight. When she woke, the sun was streaming through tall windows. She didn't remember being there. For a disoriented moment, Evangeline had no idea where she was. Then memory crashed back. The exile, the wolves, the bond, home. She sat up slowly and her body protested. Every muscle ached from the survival ordeal, but it was a distant ache now, manageable. The accelerated healing of the Sanguis Lunae bloodline, even sealed, working while she slept. A knock at the door made her jump. "Come in," she called, pulling the robe tighter around herself. A young woman entered, carrying an armful of fabric. She had warm brown skin and kind eyes, her wolf showing in the slight point to her ears and the grace of her movements. "Good morning, my lady. I'm Mira. I've been assigned as your attendant. The Alphas thought you might like help choosing something to wear." "I'm not a lady," Evangeline said automatically. You're the fated mate of the Stormfang triplets. Mira's smile was gentle. That makes you the highest-ranking female in Iron Peak territory, whether you've completed the bond or not. Evangeline wanted to argue, but Mira was already laying out gowns on the bed. Simple ones, she noted with relief. Not the elaborate confections she'd seen in the wardrobe, but practical dresses in soft fabrics. The alphas are waiting in the library, Mira continued. They said to tell you there's no rush, but when you're ready, they'd like to begin your education about the Sanguis Lunae bloodline. Education, not orders, not demands. They were keeping their promise to let her choose. Evangeline selected a dress in deep forest green, and with Mira's help, she was dressed and presentable within the hour. The young woman tried to do something elaborate with her hair, but Evangeline insisted on keeping it simple, just brushed and left loose. You look beautiful, Mira said softly. They won't be able to take their eyes off you. Evangeline's cheeks burned, but she didn't argue. The library was 3 floors of books. The walls lined floor to ceiling with volumes in every language imaginable. Calum, Zephyr, and Orion stood near a massive table covered in open books and ancient scrolls. All 3 of them stopped what they were doing when she entered. The blood song flared between them, stronger than before now that she'd had rest and food. She could feel their hunger, their desperate need to be near her, carefully leashed behind iron control. You slept well? Calum asked, his voice carefully neutral. Better than I have in years, Evangeline admitted. Thank you, for the room, for the clothes, for everything. It's nothing, Orion said, but his amber eyes blazed with something that made her breath catch. It's everything to someone who's never had anything, she corrected quietly. Silence held for a moment, heavy with unspoken emotion. Then Zephyr cleared his throat and gestured to the books. We thought we'd start with the history, help you understand what the Sanguis Lunae bloodline was before it was hunted nearly to extinction. They spent the morning going through texts so old the pages crumbled at the edges. Evangeline learned that the Moonborn Omegas had ruled the territories once, centuries ago, queens in their own right, with powers that made even alphas kneel. The command voice, Zephyr explained, his finger tracing lines of text written in a language Evangeline couldn't read. The ability to speak directly to the wolf in any shifter. It bypasses conscious thought, appeals to the animal beneath the skin. An Omega with command voice can stop an alpha attack with a single word. That's why they feared us, Evangeline said quietly. Because we upset the natural hierarchy. Because you proved the hierarchy was never natural to begin with, Calum corrected. Power isn't about physical strength. It's about will, connection, the ability to inspire rather than dominate. Sanguis Lunae understood that. The alphas who built the current system couldn't allow that truth to spread. So they killed us. They tried. Orion's voice was dark with fury. 200 years ago, Alpha King Aldrich I led the purge. He claimed the Moonborn bloodline was corrupting shifters, making them weak. In reality, he just couldn't stomach the idea of sharing power with females. Aldrich I, Evangeline repeated. Any relation to? Your mother's mate was Aldrich Nightbane, a descendant of the royal line, but not in the direct succession, Zephyr said. He rejected the family's hatred of the Sanguis Lunae, bonded with your mother despite knowing it would make him a target. They killed him for it. And my mother died of a broken bond. Yes, but not before hiding you, not before making sure the bloodline would survive. Evangeline looked down at her hands, imagining the mother she'd never known. A woman strong enough to bond with an alpha despite knowing the consequences. Brave enough to ensure her daughter's survival even as her own life ended. She must have been remarkable, Evangeline whispered. You're her daughter, Calum said softly. Of course she was. The compliment made her chest tight with emotion she didn't know how to process. They moved on to other topics, the mechanics of the bond, the powers she might develop if the seal broke, the politics of the territories and who would likely oppose her simply for existing. Draven isn't the only one who fears the Moonborn return, Zephyr explained, his analytical mind clearly having thought through every angle. The Council of Seven Alphas has maintained control for 2 centuries precisely because there's been no one powerful enough to challenge them. You represent that challenge. I can't even shift, Evangeline pointed out. How can I challenge anyone? The seal on your wolf isn't permanent, Orion said. Your mother placed it to protect you as a child, but it was designed to break when you found your fated mate, when the bond activates fully. And when does that happen? The 3 brothers exchanged glances. When you choose to complete it, Calum said carefully, when you accept us as mates and exchange blood willingly. The ritual is intense, but it's your choice, Evangeline, always your choice. The word intense hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning. Evangeline's face burned. She knew what completing the bond meant. Her mother's journal had been explicit about that part. The blood exchange, the physical intimacy, the merging of souls so complete that separation became impossible. I need time, she said quietly. You have all the time you need, Caleb promised. We've waited 300 years. We can wait as long as it takes for you to be ready. But Evangeline could feel the lie in that statement. Not in his words, which were true, but in the bond itself. The curse that hung over the three brothers like a death sentence. 10 years until they died. And she was the only one who could save them. The weight of that responsibility sat heavy on her shoulders. The days that followed fell into a pattern. Mornings in the library with a Zephyr, learning history and politics and the complex web of alliances that held the territories together. He was a patient teacher, never making her feel stupid for not knowing things she'd had no way to learn in the convent. Afternoons with Caleb, who taught her about pack dynamics and leadership. He showed her how Iron Peak operated, introduced her to key members of his staff, let her observe him making decisions. A good leader listens more than they speak, he told her one day as they watched him mediate a dispute between two wolves. Power is a tool. Knowing when not to use it is what separates a tyrant from a queen. Evenings with Orion, who insisted on teaching her combat despite her protests that she couldn't shift and therefore couldn't fight. You have a body, he said, demonstrating a basic defensive stance. You have hands and feet and a mind. That's all you need to defend yourself. The wolf is an advantage, not a requirement. He was a surprisingly gentle teacher, showing her again and again how to use an attacker's strength against them, how to find vulnerable points, how to escape holds that seemed inescapable. You're better at this than you think, he said after she successfully broke his grip for the first time. You have good instincts. You just need to trust them. And through it all, the blood song hummed between them, growing stronger with each passing day. Evangeline felt it most acutely at night, alone in her chambers. The connection pulled at her, making her hyper-aware of exactly where each brother was in the Citadel. Caleb in his office, working late. Zephyr in the library, still researching. Orion in the training yard, burning off energy with brutal exercise. All of them fighting the same pull she felt. All of them wanting her with an intensity that should have terrified her, but it didn't, because she was starting to want them back. 2 weeks after arriving at Iron Peak, Evangeline was walking through the Citadel Gardens when she encountered her first real opposition. Isolde Nightshade stood by the fountain, her blonde perfection somehow making Evangeline feel small and inadequate, even after 2 weeks of being treated like royalty. So you're the famous Sanguis Lunae, Isolde said, her voice dripping with disdain. The wolfless Omega who somehow convinced the Stormfang brothers she's their mate. Evangeline's first instinct was to run. 24 years of being treated as lesser didn't disappear in 2 weeks. But then she remembered Orion's training, Caleb's lessons about power, Zephyr's careful analysis of why people like Isolde attacked. She stood her ground. I didn't convince anyone of anything, Evangeline said quietly. The bond exists whether I want it to or not. Convenient. Isolde circled her like a predator sizing up prey. My father exiles you, and suddenly you're under the protection of the most powerful alphas in the territories. How stupid do you think we are? Your father knew what I was, Evangeline replied, and she was surprised by how steady her voice sounded. He exiled me hoping I'd die before the bond could form. It didn't work. Because you're special? Isolde laughed, the sound ugly. You're a broken Omega playing dress-up in clothes you didn't earn. The Stormfang brothers may be blinded by whatever trick your bloodline pulls, but the rest of us see you for what you are. Weak, worthless, a mistake that should have died in the mountains. Each word was designed to wound, and they did. But Evangeline had survived worse than verbal attacks. I know what I am, she said softly. I've known I was broken for 24 years. Being here doesn't change that, but it doesn't change what I am to them, either. The bond chose me. I didn't choose it, and your opinion of me changes nothing. Isolde's eyes narrowed. You think being their mate protects you? My father is organizing the council. They'll vote to have you seized, studied, drained of every drop of Sanguis Lunae blood before you can complete whatever bond you think you have. The Stormfangs can't protect you from the combined might of the council. Is that a threat? It's a promise. Then I suppose we'll see who's right. Evangeline turned to walk away, proud of herself for not showing how much Isolde's words had shaken her. She made it 3 steps before Isolde grabbed her arm, spinning her around. Don't you dare turn your back on me, you worthless. Remove your hand. The voice came from behind them, cold as winter ice. Zephyr stood there, his ice-blue eyes blazing with fury Evangeline had never seen in him before. Isolde dropped Evangeline's arm immediately. Alpha Zephyr, I was just threatening my mate, Zephyr finished. I heard every word, and I'll give you one chance to leave Iron Peak territory voluntarily before I have you forcibly removed. My father won't stand for this, Isolde sputtered. The Council has no authority in Iron Peak, Zephyr said flatly. And if your father thinks organizing against us is wise, he's even more foolish than I thought. Now leave. Before my brothers hear about this, and I have to restrain them from doing something we'll all regret. Isolde fled, her perfect composure finally cracking. Evangeline stood there, trembling with delayed reaction. Are you hurt? Zephyr asked, his fury melting into concern as he approached her. No, she said things that you've believed about yourself for years, Zephyr finished gently. I know, but Evangeline, look at me. She met his eyes. You are not broken. You are not worthless. You are Sanguis Lunae, the last moonborn Omega, and you are my mate. If Isolde or anyone else suggests otherwise, they answer to me, to all three of us. Understand? Evangeline nodded, not trusting her voice. Zephyr's hand came up, cupping her cheek. The blood song roared to life at the contact, and Evangeline gasped. I want to kiss you, he said quietly. I've wanted to since the moment we met, but I won't. Not until you're ready. Not until you ask. But know this, Evangeline. When you do ask, when you finally choose us, nothing in this world or any other will keep me from you. He dropped his hand and stepped back, leaving Evangeline standing there with her heart racing and her skin burning where he'd touched her. That night, alone in her chambers, she thought about what he'd said, about choosing, about asking, about finally accepting what the blood song had been telling her since that first moment in the snow. She was falling for them, all three of them, and that terrified her more than any exile or trial ever had. The dreams came back that night, but these weren't the vague visions of wolves watching from the forest. These were vivid, visceral, impossible to ignore. Calem's mouth on her throat, his fangs grazing the pulse point where her blood beat closest to the surface, his hands spanning her waist, pulling her closer, the heat of him burning through fabric. Zephyr's cool fingers tracing patterns across her skin, analytical even in passion, learning exactly what made her gasp and arch. His ice-blue eyes watching her with an intensity that stripped away every defense. Orion's raw strength surrounding her, his massive frame covering hers, protective and possessive in equal measure. His rough voice whispering promises against her skin that made her entire body flush with heat. Evangeline woke gasping, her body aching with needs she barely understood. And through the bond, she felt them react. Felt Calem stop mid-sentence in whatever meeting he was having. Felt Zephyr's carefully maintained control fracture, just slightly. Felt Orion's surge of hunger so intense it made her dizzy. They knew. They felt her arousal through the bond just as surely as she felt theirs. Evangeline buried her face in the pillow, mortified, but also curious. If she could feel them, could they feel everything she felt? Every spike of want, every moment of need? She thought about Orion's amber eyes. Let herself remember the way his hands had felt on her body during training, correcting her stance. How his touch had burned even through the layers of fabric. Through the bond, and she felt him respond, felt his control slip another notch. She thought about Zephyr's analytical gaze. Imagine those ice-blue eyes watching her with heat instead of detachment. Imagined his cool hands on her overheated skin. He responded too, the bond flaring bright between them. And Calem. Steady, patient Calem. She imagined his mouth on hers, imagined him finally losing the careful control he maintained so perfectly. The answering surge through the bond was almost violent in its intensity. Evangeline smiled into the darkness. If they could torment her with their presence, with the constant pull of the bond, then she could torment them right back. Fair was fair. The next morning, Evangeline walked into the library wearing a dress Mira had insisted made her eyes look absolutely luminous. It was midnight blue fitted at the bodice and left her shoulders bare. All three brothers were already there, and all three stopped what they were doing when she entered. The blood song roared to life. Good morning, Evangeline said sweetly, perfectly aware of what she was doing. Morning, Calem managed, his voice rougher than usual. She crossed to where Zephyr sat, deliberately leaning over his shoulder to look at the book he was reading. Her hair brushed his cheek, and she felt him go absolutely rigid. What are you working on? She asked innocently. Zephyr had to clear his throat. Research. On the seal. I think I found a reference to how it might be broken without the full bond completion. That got her attention. Really? Don't, Orion said from across the room, his voice strained. Don't encourage her to find a way around the bond. We've waited too long. I'm not encouraging anything, Zephyr replied, though his eyes never left Evangeline. I'm providing information so she can make an informed choice. The choice is simple, Orion growled. Bond or don't bond. There is no middle ground. Actually, Calum intervened, always the mediator. Zephyr's research could be valuable regardless. Understanding how the seal works helps us protect Evangeline if someone tries to break it by force. Who would try that? Evangeline asked. The council, all three said simultaneously. Right. Isolde's threat from yesterday. Evangeline sobered, the playful mood evaporating. What exactly could they do? If they captured you, they could attempt to break the seal through trauma, Zephyr explained clinically, though his jaw was tight. Physical or psychological. The seal is tied to your sense of safety. Extreme stress could shatter it. And then? Then your wolf awakens, Calum said. But without the bond to guide it, without mates to help you through the first shift, you'd be vulnerable. They could force a blood extraction before you learn to use your powers. They could kill you, Orion finished bluntly. Evangeline's blood ran cold. So I'm not safe here. You're safe in Iron Peak, Calum assured her. Our territory, our wards, our protection. But if you were to leave without us, then I'd be a target. Yes, she thought about that. About being trapped in this beautiful fortress for the rest of her life. About never seeing the world beyond these walls. About the price of safety being another kind of cage. I won't live in fear, she said quietly. I've done that for 24 years. I'm done. Then complete the bond, Orion said urgently. Let us give you the power to protect yourself. At the cost of tying myself to you forever? Is that such a terrible cost? His amber eyes held hers, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen from him before. And Evangeline realized the truth. No, it wasn't terrible. It was terrifying for entirely different reasons. She was falling in love with them, with Calum's steady strength, with Zephyr's brilliant mind, with Orion's fierce protection. And love made you vulnerable in ways that no enemy ever could. I need more time, she whispered. Orion looked like she'd struck him, but he nodded and left the library without another word. Calum and Zephyr stayed silent, giving her space to process. But through the bond, she felt their disappointment, their fear that she would never choose them, their desperate need to complete what fate had started, and beneath it all, their unwavering patience. They would wait, even if it killed them, because they loved her too. That evening, Evangeline stood on the balcony of her chambers, watching the sun set over Iron Peak territory. The blood song hummed between her and the three brothers, a constant reminder of what waited if she just said yes. A knock at the door made her turn. Come in? Calum entered alone. He looked tired, the weight of leadership showing in the lines around his eyes. I'm not here to pressure you, he said immediately. I just wanted to make sure you were all right after today. I'm fine. Evangeline. He crossed to stand beside her at the balcony railing. You don't have to pretend with me. I can feel through the bond that you're anything but fine. She looked out at the darkening sky. I don't know how to do this. Do what? Any of it. Be special. Be powerful. Be wanted. I spent my whole life being nothing. And now I'm supposed to be everything and I don't know how. You don't have to be everything, Calum said gently. You just have to be you. But what if me isn't enough? What if you complete the bond and realize I'm exactly what everyone always said I was? Broken, worthless, a mistake? Calum was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. I am 340 years old, he said. I have lived through wars and plagues and the rise and fall of kingdoms. I have seen everything this world has to offer. And in all those centuries, I have never met anyone braver, stronger, or more remarkable than you. I'm not. You survived exile. You saved 3 dying alphas without hesitation. You're learning politics and combat and a completely new way of life without complaint. You face every challenge with grace and courage. And you do it all while believing you're worthless. Imagine what you could do if you believed the truth. What truth? That you are extraordinary, that you were always meant for this, that the only mistake was ever making you believe otherwise. Evangeline's eyes burned with tears. I'm scared, she admitted. Of what? Of choosing you and losing myself. Of becoming just an extension of you 3 instead of my own person. Of the bond consuming everything I am until there's nothing left but what you need me to be. Understanding dawned in Caleb's eyes. Your mother's warning. In the journal. The bond is paradise and prison, Evangeline quoted. She said not all who claim you deserve you. She was right. Caleb's grip on her shoulders tightened. Not all mates deserve their sanguis lunae partners. Some see them as tools, as resources to be exploited. Your mother bonded with Aldrich, knowing his family would turn on them. She was warning you to choose carefully. And you think I should choose you? I think you should choose what makes you happy. If that's us, then yes. If it's not, then we'll protect you anyway and count ourselves lucky to have known you at all. He leaned forward, and Evangeline's breath caught, thinking he might kiss her. Instead, his forehead touched hers, the blood song swelling between them. When I kiss you, he whispered, his breath warm against her lips, it won't be like this. It won't be gentle, or careful, or chaste. When I finally let myself have you, Evangeline, I won't stop until you're marked and claimed and bound to me in every way possible. So I'm waiting, for you to be ready, for you to want it as much as I do. Then he stepped back, leaving her trembling and aching. Good night, Evangeline. He left her alone on the balcony, her heart racing and her body burning with needs that had no outlet. Through the bond, she felt Zephyr and Orion react to what had just happened, felt their hunger spike, their control fracture a little more. They were all barely hanging on, and Evangeline realized with sudden clarity that she was done waiting too. She wanted them, all three of them. The question was just, how to tell them? The answer came the next afternoon in the form of a letter. Caleb called an emergency meeting in his office, his expression grim. Zephyr and Orion were already there when Evangeline arrived. What's wrong, she asked. The council has made its move, Caleb said, handing her the letter. Evangeline read it, her blood turning to ice with every word. To the Stormfang triplets, the Council of Seven Alphas hereby demands the surrender of the female known as Evangeline Ravenscar for examination and testing. The claim that she carries sanguis lunae blood must be verified before any bond can be recognized as legitimate. You have 3 days to comply. Failure to surrender the female will be considered an act of war against the Council and all pacts under its authority. Draven Thornwolf, Council Speaker. They can't do this, Evangeline whispered. They can try, Orion snarled. Let them come. We'll tear through anyone they send. That's what they want, Zephyr said, his analytical mind working through the politics. They want an excuse to move against Iron Peak. We've grown too powerful, too independent. Evangeline is just the catalyst. So what do we do? Evangeline asked. The three brothers exchanged glances. We complete the bond, Caleb said quietly. Tonight, once you are fully bonded to us, once your powers awaken, the Council won't dare move against you. A Moonborn Queen is untouchable by law. And if I refuse? Then we fight, Orion said simply, and probably die. But that's not your burden to carry. You don't complete the bond to save us. You only do it if you want it for yourself. Evangeline looked at the letter again, at Draven's name signed at the bottom. He had tried to kill her once by exile. Now he was trying again by using her as an excuse for war. Either way, people she cared about would die, unless she did the one thing she'd been terrified to do. I want it, she said quietly. 3 heads snapped toward her. What? Caleb's voice was carefully controlled. I want the bond. I want you. All 3 of you. Not because of the Council. Not because of the threat. But because I'm tired of being scared. I'm tired of denying what I feel. And I'm ready. Orion crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms, crushing her against his chest. She could feel him shaking. You're certain? He whispered against her hair. Yes. Tonight then, Zephyr said, and there was barely controlled hunger in his cool voice. Under the full moon, the way it's meant to be done. But first, Caleb said, his golden eyes blazing with protective fury, we deal with the Council's messengers. What messengers? The ones who brought that letter. They're waiting in the courtyard to take our answer back. Evangeline's eyes narrowed. Then let's give them an answer they won't forget. The courtyard was filled with wolves when they descended. 5 messengers from the Council, surrounded by Iron Peak warriors, all of them tense and ready for violence. Evangeline walked between the 3 brothers, her head high, no longer the frightened Omega who had arrived 3 weeks ago. The lead messenger, a scarred alpha with cold eyes, sneered when he saw her. This is the Sanguis Lunae. She looks like a scrawny Omega to me. Careful, Caleb said softly. You're insulting my mate. Your claimed mate, the messenger corrected. The bond isn't complete. which means she's fair game for council examination. She's not game at all, Zephyr said, his voice dropping to a temperature that made frost form on the ground. She's under our protection, and if the council thinks they can take her, they're welcome to try. That's a declaration of war. No, Evangeline said, her voice ringing clear across the courtyard. It's a statement of fact. I am not property to be examined or tested. I am Sanguis Lunae, Moonborn Omega, last daughter of the sacred bloodline, and I choose to bond with the Stormfang triplets of my own free will. The council doesn't recognize uncompleted bonds. Then you have until morning to leave Iron Peak territory, Orion growled, because by dawn the bond will be complete, and anyone who challenges a fully bonded Moonborn Queen will answer to me. The messenger's eyes widened slightly. You can't complete the bond in one night. Watch us, Evangeline said. She turned and walked back into the citadel, the three brothers flanking her, leaving the messengers staring after them in shock. Behind her, she heard one of them mutter, "We need to warn the council, immediately." Good, let them warn, let them be afraid. Because Evangeline Ravenscar was done being the hunted. It was time to become the hunter. They left the citadel as the sun touched the horizon, heading for a clearing deep in the forest where ancient stones stood in a circle. This was sacred ground, Zephyr explained, a place where bonds had been completed for thousands of years. Evangeline could feel the magic in the air as they approached. Old magic, powerful magic, the kind that recognized what she was. The full moon was already rising enormous in silver, bathing the clearing in ethereal light. White rose petals covered the ground, and candles burned in a perfect circle around the ancient stones. Someone had prepared this. Someone had been hoping she'd say yes. Who did this? Evangeline asked. We did, Caleb said softly. Every night since you arrived, just in case. The devotion in that simple statement took her breath away. Then let's not waste another night, she said. They arranged themselves in the center of the circle, the three brothers surrounding her. The moonlight made their eyes glow, gold and blue and amber, predatory and beautiful. Last chance to change your mind, Caleb said, though his voice shook with the effort of offering her that out. I'm not changing my mind. Then we begin. Draven's silver blade pressed against Evangeline's throat, cold enough to burn. 120 wolves surrounded them in the dungeon courtyard, waiting for the killing blow. The Council of Seven Alphas stood in a semicircle, their ancient faces carved from stone and cruelty. Isolde Nightshade watched from the shadows, her perfect features twisted with vindictive satisfaction. And the three Stormfang brothers stood frozen at the courtyard entrance, held back by a wall of enemy wolves, their golden eyes blazing with helpless rage as they felt every spike of fear through the bond. Draven leaned closer, his breath hot against Evangeline's ear. Any last words, Abomination? Evangeline's hands were chained behind her back. Her body was covered in cuts from 3 days of torture. Every breath sent pain lancing through her broken ribs. But her eyes, when they lifted to meet Draven's, held no fear, only fury. Yes, she whispered, you should have killed me in the mountains. The blade bit down, drawing blood, and the world shattered. The seal that had been placed on Evangeline 24 years ago, woven by her dying mother and 3 ancient witches, reinforced by 2 decades of holy water and blessed ground, fed by every prayer Mother Superior Celestine had whispered over a sleeping infant, broke. Not gradually, not gently. It exploded. Light erupted from Evangeline's body, violet and silver and bright as a newborn star. The chains holding her arms melted like ice in summer sun. The blade at her throat turned to ash in Draven's hand, and the scream that tore from her throat was not pain, it was transformation. Her bones cracked and reformed, her spine elongated, fur erupted across her skin in a wave of pure white that seemed to glow with its own internal luminescence. Her hands became paws, massive and tipped with claws like silver daggers. Her face stretched and reformed into a muzzle full of teeth designed for tearing. The shift took 3 seconds. 3 seconds that rewrote everything the watching wolves thought they knew about their kind. Because when it finished, when Evangeline Ravenscar completed her first transformation, she was not an Omega. She was not even a standard Alpha. She was something the world had not seen in 200 years. A Moonborn Queen. The wolf that stood in the courtyard was massive beyond natural law, larger than any Alpha present, including Draven himself. Her fur was white as fresh snow, unmarked except for a crescent moon shape on her chest that seemed to shimmer with violet light, and her eyes, when they opened, blazed with amethyst fire. Every wolf in the courtyard dropped to their knees, not from choice, not from respect, from biological imperative. The command voice was the rarest gift of the Sanguis Lunae bloodline. The ability to speak directly to the wolf inside every shifter, to bypass conscious thought and appeal to the animal that lived beneath the skin. Evangeline didn't speak. She didn't need to. The power rolled out from her in a wave of pure dominance, washing over friend and enemy alike with the inexorable force of a tidal wave. Kneel. 120 wolves collapsed. Alphas and betas and omegas, warriors and council members and rival pack leaders. All of them driven to the ground by a voice that resonated in the marrow of their bones. All except three. Calum, Zephyr, and Orion remained standing, the mate bond protecting them from the command that flattened everyone else. But they too felt it, felt the sheer crushing weight of her power, and their eyes went wide with shock and awe and desperate, wild hope. Impossible, Draven gasped from where he knelt, his face pressed to the cold stone. The bloodline was extinct. The last Moonborn died 200 years ago. Evangeline's massive head swung toward him, her lips pulled back from fangs the length of daggers. When she spoke, her voice came out as a rumbling growl that every wolf present understood as clearly as their own thoughts. My mother was Lyora Ravenscar, Sanguis Lunae, Moonborn Omega, your brother's mate. You murdered him. You exiled her. You sent me to die in the mountains just like you did them. They were abominations, Draven snarled, trying and failing to rise against the command holding him down. The old bloodlines carry too much power. They upset the natural order. No, they threaten your order, your control, your pathetic need to rule through fear instead of earning respect. Evangeline took a step forward, and the ground trembled beneath her paws. The violet light in her eyes intensified, and those watching saw lightning begin to arc between the crescent moon mark on her chest. You took everything from me, my mother, my childhood, my chance to know who I was. You made me believe I was broken when I was simply sealed. You humiliated me in front of hundreds. You exiled me to freeze and die alone. Another step. The lightning spread, crackling across her white fur like living veins of power. But I survived. I found my mates. I learned the truth. And now, Draven Thornwolf, you will answer for every crime you committed against my bloodline. The council will never accept you, one of the 7 alphas shouted from where he knelt. You're an aberration. We'll hunt you to the... He never finished the sentence. Evangeline's head snapped toward him, and the command voice lashed out like a whip. Silence. The old alpha's jaw slammed shut so hard his teeth cracked. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth. Evangeline, Calum's voice cut through the tension, calm and steady despite the violence humming in the air. Don't let them make you into what they fear. You're better than this. She turned to look at him, and for a moment, the 3 Stormfang brothers saw the woman they knew beneath the terrifying power of her wolf. Saw the frightened Omega who had survived 3 days in the mountains. Saw their mate, their fated one, struggling with the weight of the abilities that had just been thrust upon her. They deserved death. Yes, Zephyr agreed, his analytical mind working through the politics even now. But if you kill council members, you start a war that will consume every pack in the Northern Territories. Hundreds will die. Thousands. Is that the legacy you want for your first day as Moonborn Queen? Evangeline's growl rumbled through the courtyard like distant thunder. The logical part of her brain knew Zephyr was right, knew that mercy was the stronger choice, the wiser choice. But the wolf inside her, awakened after 24 years of forced dormancy, wanted blood. Orion moved then, crossing the courtyard with the fluid grace of a born warrior. He stopped directly in front of her, so close that her massive muzzle nearly touched his chest. He reached up with one hand and placed it against the crescent moon mark on her chest right over her thundering heart. I know you're angry, he said softly, his amber eyes locked on her violet ones. I know you want to make them pay. But vengeance won't fill the hollow places they left in you. Only we can do that. Your mates, your pack, your family. The lightning crackling across her fur began to dim. Come back to us, Orion whispered. Come back to yourself. You've proven your power. Now prove your mercy. For a long moment, Evangeline didn't move, didn't respond. The entire courtyard held its breath, waiting to see which way the balance would tip. Then slowly the violet fire in her eyes began to fade. The command holding the assembled wolves eased just enough for them to breathe properly. And when Evangeline spoke again, her voice was quieter, though no less powerful. Draven Thornwolf, for the murder of Alpha Aldrich Nightbane, for the persecution of Lyora Ravenscar, for the attempted murder of her daughter, For conspiracy with the council to eliminate the Moonborn bloodline, I sentence you to death." "No," Isolde's scream echoed off the stone walls. "Please, he's my father. Please don't." He showed no mercy to the orphaned infant he condemned to exile. "But I am not him." Evangeline's massive form moved faster than the eye could follow. One moment she stood facing Draven. The next, her jaws closed around his throat. There was a single sharp crack. And then it was over. Quick, clean, merciful. Far more merciful than he deserved. Draven's body hit the ground, and the silver of his wolf faded to the gray pallor of death. Isolde collapsed beside him, her perfect composure finally shattering into broken sobs. Evangeline turned to the Council of Seven. "You have a choice. Acknowledge me as Moonborn Queen. Accept the Stormfang brothers as my bonded mates and equal rulers. Submit to the new order, or join Draven in death." The eldest council member, the one who had threatened her moments before Arhamir, lifted his head. Blood still dripped from his mouth where his teeth had cracked, but his eyes held grudging respect. "The old laws are clear. The Moonborn Omega carries the right to rule. To challenge her is to challenge the moon herself. We submit, Queen Evangeline. We submit." One by one, the other 6 council members echoed the oath. "Then rise. Tell every pack in the Northern Territories. Tell them the Moonborn bloodline has returned. Tell them a new age begins tonight." The wolves rose slowly, shakily, their submission complete. Only Isolde remained on the to-her. The massive white wolf lowered its head and licked her face. Evangeline smiled and patted its head. The massive white wolf lowered its head and licked her face. Evangeline smiled and patted its head. The massive white wolf lowered its head and licked her face. Evangeline smiled and patted its head. The massive white wolf lowered its head and licked her face. Evangeline smiled and patted its head. The massive white wolf lowered its head and licked her face. Evangeline smiled and patted its head. The massive white wolf lowered its head and licked her face. Evangeline smiled and patted its head. The massive white wolf lowered its head and licked her face. Evangeline smiled and patted its head. The massive white wolf lowered its head and licked her face. Evangeline smiled and patted its head. The massive white wolf lowered its head and licked her face. Evangeline smiled and patted its head. The massive white wolf lowered its head and licked her face. Evangeline smiled and patted its head. The massive white wolf lowered its head and licked her face. Evangeline smiled and patted its head. The massive white wolf lowered its head and licked her face. Evangeline smiled and patted its head. The massive white wolf lowered its head and licked her face. Evangeline smiled and patted its head. The massive white wolf lowered its head and licked her face. Evangeline smiled and patted its head. The massive white wolf lowered its head and licked her face. Evangeline smiled and patted its head. The massive white wolf lowered its head and licked her face. Evangeline smiled and patted its head. The massive white wolf lowered its head and licked her face. Evangeline smiled and patted its head. The massive white wolf lowered its head and licked her face. Evangeline smiled and patted its head. The massive white wolf lowered its head and licked her face. Evangeline smiled and patted its head. The massive white wolf lowered its head and licked her face. Evangeline smiled and patted its head. The massive white wolf lowered its head and licked her face. Evangeline smiled and patted its head. The massive white wolf lowered its head and licked her face. Evangeline smiled and patted its head. The massive white wolf lowered its head and licked her face. Evangeline smiled and patted its head. The massive white wolf lowered its head and licked her face. Evangeline smiled and patted its head. The massive white wolf lowered its head and licked her face. Evangeline smiled and patted its head. The massive white wolf lowered its head and licked her face. Evangeline smiled and patted its head. The massive white wolf lowered its head and licked her face. Evangeline smiled and patted its head to her. The massive white wolf lowered its head until her muzzle was level with the broken woman's face. "I could kill you too," Evangeline said quietly, for Isolde's ears alone. "You betrayed me, drugged me, helped deliver me to torture and death. By law, you've earned execution." Isolde flinched but didn't look away. "But you're already suffering more than any punishment I could devise. You'll live with what you've done, with what you enabled. That's sentence enough." Evangeline stepped back. "You are banished from Iron Peak territory, from Silverclaw, from any pack that acknowledges my rule. You will wander as a lone wolf belonging nowhere until you find a way to earn redemption or die trying." "Thank you," Isolde whispered, the words broken with grief. "I don't deserve your mercy." "No, you don't. That's why I'm giving it anyway." Evangeline turned away from the sobbing woman and padded toward the three Stormfang brothers who waited at the edge of the courtyard. As she approached, her massive form began to shimmer, and the shift reversed itself. Fur receded, bones reformed. In seconds, Evangeline stood before them on two legs, naked and covered in blood, that was both hers and Draven's, her dark hair wild around her face. She swayed, suddenly overwhelmed by everything that had just happened. The awakening, the power, the death she had delivered with her own jaws. Calum caught her before she could fall, sweeping her up into his arms as if she weighed nothing. Zephyr appeared at his side with a cloak that he wrapped around her trembling body. And Orion positioned himself as guard, his amber eyes scanning the assembled wolves with a clear warning. Try anything and die. Take me home, Evangeline whispered against Calum's chest. Please, I need to go home. Already done, little mate, Calum murmured. Already done. They left the dungeon courtyard under a sky full of stars. The journey back to Iron Peak Citadel took 4 hours. Calum refused to let Evangeline walk, carrying her the entire distance while Zephyr and Orion flanked them. Behind them, a procession of witnesses followed at a respectful distance, spreading word of what they had seen. The Moonborn Queen had risen. The old order was dead. A new age had begun. By the time they reached the Citadel, Evangeline had fallen into an exhausted sleep, her body finally surrendering to the trauma of 3 days of torture followed by the most powerful first shift in recorded history. Calum carried her straight to the private chambers they had prepared weeks ago, hoping against hope that she would one day agree to use them. He laid her on the massive bed with infinite gentleness. Zephyr appeared with warm water and soft cloths, and together the three brothers cleaned the blood from her skin, tended her wounds, dressed her in a silk nightgown that whispered against her healing cuts. She killed an alpha, Orion said quietly as they worked, without training, without preparation, just pure instinct and power. The Moonborn Omega is not a myth, Zephyr replied, his analytical mind still processing everything they had witnessed. The histories barely scratch the surface of what they could do. If she learns to fully control those abilities, she'll be unstoppable, Calum finished. He brushed a strand of dark hair from Evangeline's sleeping face, his expression tender. And she'll be ours, our mate, our queen, our salvation. If she still chooses us, Orion pointed out. Now that the seal is broken, now that her wolf is awake, she has options. She could rule alone, could choose any mate she wants. She'll choose us. Calum's voice held absolute certainty. The blood song doesn't lie. The bond recognized her the moment we touched. We're fated, all four of us. The moon herself wove our threads together. Then we complete the bond, Zephyr said. Tonight, before doubt can creep in, before politics and power and the weight of her new responsibilities can complicate what should be simple. She's exhausted, Orion protested. She's been tortured. She just killed someone. We can't ask her to. Evangeline's eyes opened. Violet, still glowing faintly with residual power. Yes, she said, her voice hoarse but steady. Yes, you can, because I don't want to wait anymore. I've spent 24 years waiting. Waiting to shift. Waiting to belong somewhere. Waiting to understand who I was supposed to be. I'm done waiting. She sat up slowly, the silk nightgown slipping off one shoulder. The wounds on her body had already begun to heal. The accelerated regeneration of the Moonborn bloodline knitting torn flesh back together before their eyes. The bond is already there, she continued, looking at each of them in turn. I feel you, all three of you, every moment, every breath. It's beautiful and terrifying, and I don't want it to be incomplete anymore. You're certain? Calum asked, even as his entire body tensed with hope. This isn't just adrenaline from the battle. You understand what completing the bond means? You'll be tied to us for the rest of your life. Our lifespans will merge. Our powers will intertwine. You'll never be entirely separate from us again. I know. Evangeline reached out and took his hand, then Zephyr's, then Orion's, linking the four of them together. I read my mother's journal. I know what the bond entails, the good and the dangerous, and I choose it anyway. I choose you. All three of you. The blood song, which had been humming contentedly since they reached the Citadel, suddenly swelled into something magnificent. Something that sang of destiny fulfilled and promises kept and love that transcended time itself. Then we do this properly, Zephyr said, his cool composure finally cracking to reveal the desperate longing beneath. Under the full moon, with the old words, the way it was meant to be done. They led her to the highest tower of the Citadel, to a room with no roof, open to the night sky. The full moon hung directly overhead, so bright it cast shadows sharp as noon. Someone, probably the Citadel staff who had been preparing for this possibility for weeks, had scattered the floor with white rose petals and lit candles in a perfect circle. Evangeline stood in the center of that circle, flanked by three ancient alphas who looked at her like she hung the moon itself. Calum spoke first, his voice formal with ritual, but shaking with emotion. I am Calum Stormfang, eldest son of the Stormfang line, alpha of Iron Peak territory. For 340 years I have walked this earth alone. For 300 years I have searched. Tonight I offer my blood, my strength, my life to Evangeline Ravenscar, Moonborn Omega, last daughter of the sacred line. I ask for her consent to bond. I pledge to protect, honor, and serve her for as long as the moon shines. He drew a silver blade across his palm, letting blood well dark and rich. Then he held his hand out, offering. Evangeline took his hand in both of hers and raised it to her lips. The blood tasted like copper and lightning and home. The moment it touched her tongue, the bond between them solidified, became real in a way it hadn't been before. She could feel Calum in her mind now, not as a presence, but as a part of herself, his strength, his patience, his unwavering devotion. Mine, her wolf whispered. Ours. Zephyr stepped forward next. I am Zephyr Stormfang, second son of the Stormfang line, scholar and strategist. I have lived 337 years in pursuit of knowledge, but the only truth I need is this. You are my mate, my anchor, my purpose. I offer my blood, my mind, my soul. I pledge to guide, support, and stand beside you until the stars burn cold. His blood tasted like winter wind and ancient wisdom and fierce protection. When their bond snapped into place, Evangeline gasped. Where Calum was warm strength, Zephyr was cool precision. He balanced her, grounded her, gave her the clarity to see through the chaos. Orion came last. I am Orion Stormfang, youngest son, warrior and guardian. For 334 years, I have fought battles that meant nothing because I had nothing worth fighting for. Until you. I offer my blood, my fury, my heart. I pledge to be your shield, your sword, your shelter in every storm. I am yours completely. His blood tasted like wild places and desperate love and promises written in starlight. The bond completion was explosive. All three connections activated simultaneously, weaving together into something greater than the sum of its parts. Evangeline felt herself expanding, her consciousness touching theirs, their power flowing into her as hers flowed into them. And then it was her turn. She drew the silver blade across her own palm, watching violet-tinged blood well up. Blood that carried power even the brothers' ancient lineage could not match. I am Evangeline Ravenscar Stormfang, she said, the new surname feeling right on her tongue. Daughter of Lyora, last of the Moonborn Omegas. For 24 years I believed I was nothing. You taught me I was everything. I offer my blood, freely given, my power freely shared, my love freely pledged. I claim you as my mates, my alphas, my family, my home. She held her bleeding palm over the candlelit circle, letting drops fall. Where her blood hit the white rose petals, they began to glow. Calum stepped forward first, pressing his mouth to her bleeding palm. Then Zephyr, then Orion. Each of them drinking from her, accepting the gift of Sanguis Lunae blood that would change them irrevocably. The power surge that followed was visible even from the Citadel courtyard far below. Golden light erupted from the rooftop tower, spiraling up into the night sky, intertwining with the moon's silver glow. The stones of the Citadel itself began to hum, responding to magic that hadn't touched them in centuries. Inside the circle, the four bonded mates collapsed together, overcome by the intensity of the connection fully realized. Evangeline found herself cradled between three massive bodies, all of them shaking with the force of the bond settling into place. She could feel everything now. Calum's steady heartbeat syncing with hers, Zephyr's brilliant mind opening like a book she could read, Orion's fierce protectiveness wrapping around all of them like armor. And they could feel her, the vast, oceanic power of her moonborn heritage, the compassion that had survived years of cruelty, the strength that had carried her through exile and torture and transformation. The curse, Calum gasped. I can feel it breaking. The curse that had hung over the Stormfang triplets for 340 years, the death sentence that would have claimed them at 350, shattered like glass. In its place, something new took root, a shared lifespan, a merged destiny. They would live as long as she did, and she would live as long as they did. Centuries probably, maybe longer. Time enough to build the world they had dreamed of. Time enough to love each other the way they were meant to be loved. When the golden light finally faded and the four of them could breathe again, Evangeline looked up at the moon overhead. "Thank you," she whispered to the silver orb that had witnessed everything, "for keeping me safe, for bringing me to them, for making me wait until I was ready." The moon didn't answer, of course, but Evangeline could have sworn it shone a little brighter. 3 days later, on the first day of the new moon, the coronation took place. 400 alphas had gathered in the Great Hall of Iron Peak Citadel. Packs from across the Northern Territories and even representatives from the South and West. Word had spread fast. The Moonborn Queen had risen. The Stormfang brothers had completed their bond. A new power ruled the territories, and every alpha with an ounce of political sense wanted to be present to witness it. Evangeline stood in her private chambers, looking at herself in the full-length mirror, barely recognizing the woman who stared back. The gown was white silk that seemed to glow with its own luminescence, fitted at the bodice and flowing to the floor in elegant waves. The seamstresses had embroidered it with silver thread in patterns of moon phases and wolf tracks, each stitch placed with reverent precision. Her dark hair had been left loose, flowing past her shoulders in waves that caught the light. But it was the crown that took her breath away. Moonstone and silver, worked into a delicate circlet that would rest on her brow. At its center, a crescent moon that seemed to pulse with violet light as if responding to the power in her blood. "You're terrifying," a familiar voice said from the doorway. Mother Superior Celestine stood there, older than Evangeline remembered, her face lined with emotion. Behind her, 3 of the younger nuns from the convent waited nervously. "Mother Superior," Evangeline's voice broke. "You came. Did you think I would miss this?" Celestine crossed the room and took Evangeline's hands in her weathered ones. "I raised you, child, fed you, taught you, protected you for 24 years. Of course I came to see you crowned. I killed someone." The confession tumbled out before Evangeline could stop it. "Draven, I killed him. Does that make me a monster?" "It makes you a queen who delivered justice." Celestine's grip tightened. "Your mother would be so proud of you, not for the killing, but for the mercy you showed afterward, for choosing to build instead of destroy, for breaking the cycle of violence that has plagued the territories for centuries." "I'm scared," Evangeline admitted quietly. "What if I'm not enough? What if I fail? You survived exile in the frozen mountains. You awakened power that hasn't been seen in 200 years. You tamed 3 alpha brothers who spent 3 centuries waiting for you. Child, if you can do all that, you can do anything." A knock at the door interrupted them. Calum, Zephyr, and Orion entered, and all 3 stopped dead at the sight of Evangeline in her coronation gown. "Magnificent," Calum breathed. "Terrifying," Zephyr added. "Mine," Orion finished with possessive satisfaction. Evangeline laughed, the sound breaking the tension. "Ours," she corrected. "We're all each other's now. That's how this works." They escorted her to the Great Hall, one on each side and one behind, a unit moving as one. The blood bond hummed between them, keeping them synchronized in a way that required no words. When they reached the great doors, Evangeline paused. On the other side, 400 alphas waited to judge her, to decide if she was worthy of the crown her bloodline had earned, to determine the future of the territories. The old Evangeline, the one who had spent 24 years believing she was broken, would have run. But the Moonborn Queen simply squared her shoulders, lifted her chin, and walked through those doors into her destiny. The hall fell silent as she entered. 400 pairs of eyes tracked her progress down the center aisle. 400 alphas, used to power and dominance, felt something shift in the air as she passed. The blood song, which had only ever existed between Evangeline and her 3 mates, suddenly expanded outward. Every wolf in the room felt it, the presence of true royalty. At the far end of the hall, a throne waited, not the old seat that had belonged to previous territory leaders. This was new, crafted specifically for her over the past 3 days. Moonstone and silver, designed to match her crown. Evangeline climbed the steps alone. Calum, Zephyr, and Orion remained at the base, making clear through their positioning that while they supported her, this moment belonged to her. The eldest council member stepped forward, carrying the moonstone crown on a velvet cushion. "Evangeline Ravenscar Stormfang," he intoned, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast hall. "Daughter of Lyora, last of the Moonborn Omegas, fated mate to the Stormfang triplets. Do you accept the responsibility of ruling the Northern Territories with wisdom and mercy?" "I do." "Do you pledge to protect the weak, guide the strong, and uphold the sacred laws that govern our kind?" "I do." "Then by the authority of the council, by the will of the assembled packs, and by the blessing of the moon herself, I crown you Moonborn Queen." He placed the circlet on her head, and the moment it touched her brow, the crescent moon at its center blazed with violet light. Every wolf in the hall dropped to one knee, not from command voice this time, from genuine submission, from recognition that the right leader had finally risen. Evangeline stood before them, the crown blazing on her brow, her three mates kneeling with everyone else, and felt the weight of expectations settle onto her shoulders. It should have crushed her. Instead, it felt like wings. "Rise," she said softly, and 400 wolves stood as one. "I know what you see when you look at me. An Omega who couldn't shift, a broken wolf cast aside, someone who should have died in the mountains 3 weeks ago. And you're right. That is who I was, but it's not who I am." Her voice strengthened, carrying to the farthest reaches of the hall. "I am the daughter of wolves who loved each other so much that death couldn't sever their bond. I am the heir to a bloodline that has been hunted, feared, and nearly extinguished because of the power we carry. I am the mate to 3 alphas who waited 300 years and never gave up hope. And I am done apologizing for existing." She descended the steps, moving among the assembled alphas, letting them see her clearly. "The old order is finished. The days of ruling through fear and violence end tonight. In their place, we build something new. Packs that protect instead of prey. Leaders who serve instead of dominate. A future where orphaned Omegas are treasured, not exiled. Where power is measured by what you give, not what you take." She returned to the throne and sat, the moonstone crown blazing brighter. "I am Evangeline, Moonborn Queen, and this is my reign. Join me in building it, or step aside for those who will." Silence held for 3 heartbeats. Then Calum stepped forward, climbing the steps to stand at her right hand. "She is my queen," he declared, his voice ringing with pride. "My mate, my purpose, and I pledge my strength, my territory, my life to her service." Zephyr joined him on her left. "She is my anchor," he said, "my wisdom, my truth, and I pledge my knowledge, my strategy, my devotion to her cause." Orion stood behind the throne, his hands coming to rest on her shoulders. "She is my soul," he growled, "my reason, my everything, and I pledge my fury, my protection, my heart to her defense." One by one, the assembled alphas came forward. One by one, they knelt before the throne and spoke the words of allegiance, some with enthusiasm, some with reluctance, but all of them recognizing the truth written in blood and moonlight and destiny. The Moonborn Queen had returned, and the world would never be the same. 6 months later, Evangeline stood on the balcony of her private chambers, watching the sun set over Iron Peak territory. The autumn air was cool but not yet cold, carrying the scent of pine and approaching winter. So much had changed since that night in the Great Hall. The Northern Territories had reorganized under her rule. Packs that had been at each other's throats for decades had found common ground. Orphaned Omegas from across the region had been brought to a new sanctuary Evangeline had established, a place where they could learn and grow without fear. The Council of 7 had been dissolved and replaced with a Council of 12, with representation from all castes and territories. Decisions were made collectively now, not handed down from on high, and Evangeline herself had grown into her power. The moonborn abilities that had exploded out of her during that first shift were now controlled, refined. She could shift at will, could use the command voice with surgical precision, could channel healing through the bond to strengthen injured wolves. She was still learning, still discovering new depths to the power her bloodline carried. But she was no longer afraid of it. Behind her, the door opened quietly. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. The blood bond told her everything. Calum's steady warmth, Zephyr's cool precision, Orion's fierce devotion. 3 presences that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. "You should be resting," Calum chided gently as he joined her at the balcony railing. "The healers said—" "The healers fuss too much," Evangeline interrupted with a smile. "I'm pregnant, not dying." Her hand moved unconsciously to her stomach, where a tiny life was just beginning to grow. A child. Their child. The first offspring of a moonborn queen and 3 alpha mates in recorded history. The healers had no idea what to expect. Evangeline was terrified and thrilled in equal measure. "We could run away," Orion suggested from where he leaned against the doorframe. "Disappear into the mountains. Raise the child in peace, away from politics and expectations." "You don't mean that," Zephyr said, though his tone was fond. "You love the politics almost as much as I do." "I love her," Orion corrected. "The politics are just tolerable." Evangeline laughed and held out her hands. All 3 brothers moved to take them, surrounding her with warmth and strength and love, so fierce it still sometimes took her breath away. "No running away," she said firmly. "We have work to do, a world to rebuild, a child to prepare for, a future to create. And revenge to plan," a new voice added. All four of them turned to see Mother Superior Celestine standing in the doorway, her expression grave. In her hands, she held a letter sealed with red wax. "What is it?" Evangeline asked, her stomach sinking. "A message. From Japan. There's another one, Evangeline. Another Moonborn Omega. She's 16, awakening early, and being hunted by 3 separate packs who want to claim her by force." The protective fury that rose in Evangeline was instant and absolute. Her eyes flashed violet, and the 3 brothers felt her power surge through the bond. "Then we go to her," Evangeline said, her voice carrying the command that made alphas kneel. "We teach her what we learned. We protect her the way no one protected me. And we show those hunting packs exactly what happens when you threaten Moonborn blood." Calum smiled, sharp and dangerous. "I was hoping you'd say that." "We leave in the morning," Zephyr added, already planning in logistics. "Full security detail. No chances." "She'll be terrified," Orion said quietly. "Alone, hunted, believing she's broken." "Then we'll teach her the truth," Evangeline replied, her hand still resting on her stomach, on the future growing there. "The same truth I learned. Being different isn't the same as being broken. Being hunted doesn't mean being helpless. And having power doesn't require apologizing for it." She looked out over Iron Peak territory one last time as the sun finished setting, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold. Somewhere out there, a frightened girl was waiting for rescue, for hope, for someone to tell her she wasn't alone. Evangeline had been that girl once. Now she was the queen who would save her. The moon rose over the mountains, full and bright, casting silver light across the land. And in that light, 3 wolves appeared on the balcony beside their mate, black and silver and charcoal, massive and powerful, their golden eyes fixed on the horizon. Together, the 4 of them howled. A promise, a warning, a declaration. The Moonborn Queen had risen, and anyone who threatened her people would learn exactly what that meant. In the great hall far below, 400 wolves heard that howl and smiled. In the new sanctuary, orphaned Omegas heard it and felt safe for the first time in their lives. In territories across the north, alphas heard it and remembered their oaths. And in a small apartment in Tokyo, a 16-year-old girl with violet eyes and white hair heard it through a connection she didn't understand and felt hope bloom in her chest. "I'm coming," Evangeline's voice whispered through that impossible bond. "Hold on, I'm coming." The girl closed her eyes and smiled through her tears. She wasn't alone anymore. None of them were. The Moonborn bloodline had returned, and they were going to change everything.